Okay, so we've pressed this seam open, making sure on both the front and back that seam is really nicely pressed open and not bubbled over. We are gonna even up these ends before sewing. So I just lined it up with the straight of the smallest fabric and then cut. You might have to cut more than once because you're cutting through several layers here. That's fine. Always cut away from you again in one smooth stroke. Don't saw back and forth.
What would they do if they don't have a rotary cutter? Just
then I would take a ruler, draw a line,
and use shears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I said I was going to show you a French seam, and this is where that is. You are going to fold this pillowcase in half, but we are folding wrong sides together. So you want how the pillowcase will ultimately look. And you can tell that on this one by the fact that there's not that purple band on the wrong side. So we're folding it together.
So wrong sides together, meaning wrong sides touching each other. Mm-hmm. So the right sides are on the outside.
Yeah. Then we are gonna sew down this edge a 1/2 inch. I would have my students pin it. I am not gonna do that right now.
Risky business.
I know. Start from the top here, because if the edges get uneven somewhere, you want them to be on the bottom and you want these edges to be flush at the top. Then I'm going to take it over to my cutting board and I'm going to look at this bottom edge on both sides. And sure enough, it's a little bit off. So I'm just going to cut a new line that is perpendicular to these edges, but makes these even. If you're doing this with shears, you could, again, just once draw a line and cut with shears.
Is that a 1/4 inch, an 1/8 inch?
This, oh, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't really matter.
It's just making them even.
Just make it straight. Yeah. But try not to, you don't want to take a huge chunk out of it there.
Yes, true. If you're taking like an inch or more out, you might affect the final product.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're going to sew along this bottom edge. I'm going to start here and sew to the bottom, because that way if it gets off a little bit, it comes, if you fold from the fold to here, you might have a pucker at the end of your seam. Again, your choice whether you pin this or not. So what makes this a French seam is we're going to turn this back inside out and sew another seam again. A French seam is just a seam encased inside a seam. Back when they didn't have sergers, you would just have the raw edges of this on the inside of your fabric. So a French seam was a higher quality because it was finished on the inside. And even today, now that we have sergers, it still takes more work to sew each seam twice. So a French seam is a mark of quality. Before we turn this inside out though, we want to trim down our selvage. So it's currently at 1/2 inch. You can take regular shears to do it, or I have this. These are called pinking shears, and they keep an edge from unraveling a little bit better than just a straight edge, because when it starts to unravel, it just comes out of these notches.
They interrupt the
yes,
threads.
Yes. There's a little bit of bulk to go through here, so you might have to go one layer at a time. Especially with pinking shears, they're a little bit harder to... You can take all the time for that, or, you know, once again, the rotary cutter is super fun and my best friend, except for the seam ripper. I just lined that seam up with the 1/4 inch line on my ruler there, and I'm trimming this down. Okay, one of the last things you want to do before you turn this inside out is you want to clip your corner. The reason you clip a corner is when you turn this inside out, this is a lot of fabric that you're going to compress into that little spot, like when you flip it inside out. So to clip a corner, you clip a diagonal 45 degrees away, but you don't want to clip through the intersection where the 2 lines of stitching meet. Okay, now we're going to turn this inside out. Once again, you want to make sure your seam really gets on the edge, and also that your corner gets poked out. To poke out the corner, they do have fancy tools. I just saved chopsticks from takeout. If you like to live dangerously, you can do this with scissors, but you will likely poke a hole through.
Could you do it with like a long, skinny dowel rod?
Yeah, anything that, honestly,
or
a
do you need it
blunted
to have
pencil,
like a point?
It's better to have a point. So we're gonna get the seam on the very edge, and I actually press it at this point because what makes this French seam is you don't want it to show up after you've sewn your seam. So you really want to make sure it's on the edge. Here. Then you are going to sew again at 1/2 inch. The nice thing is you don't need to pin this time because it's already sewn together. This is again where I said I'd differentiate. So if I had a student who was ahead, I'd have them do wrong sides together and sew this first seam and turn it inside out. And if I had a student who was further behind on that first step of, you know, turning out the hot dog, I would just have them put right sides together and then sew and either pink the edge so it didn't unravel on the inside of their pillow, or if you have a serger, that's a nice place where you can serge the edge. Okay, there is just one more seam on the pillow, and that's because we're going to do a pivot, which is another technique I'm going to show you this time. We're going to start here. We're going to turn the corner and sew along the bottom. Again, 1/2 of an inch seam allowance. Or turn a corner on the machine, you want to stop about the distance of your seam allowance away. So I'm sewing with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so I want to stop a 1/2 inch away. When you get close, you use the hand wheel, always turning it towards you to stitch 1 stitch at a time. You can test it out now. So you stop with your needle down. So you turn your hand wheel towards you until your needle is down. That's the important part about a pivot. You pick up the presser foot and you turn it. And if it's not yet at a 1/2 inch, you could go back and do 1 more stitch, but we're good here. The important thing to remember, and sometimes students forget, is put the presser foot back down. If you don't, you will instantly hear a bad garble and you gotta stop and take that out and unthread the machine.
Now I know what I did wrong 20 years ago in 7th grade.
What did you do wrong?
I didn't put the presser foot back down, and I was constantly untangling my machine.
Oh, that's funny. All the things you learn about your spouse.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you turn it inside out, and you're done. You got this nice pillowcase. Oh, before you do, take a picture of your seams. Upload them to standard seams. Then turn it inside out. Flip it out, make sure you get this bottom corner nice and poked out. Take a picture of the front and back, but you see, it's just really a simple project. Super fun, super addictive. Oh, I gotta poke out the other corner. Oh, and really easy to do. One thing you're looking for though is you're trying on a French seam especially, you shouldn't see any raveled edges on this seam. That happens when you either didn't trim your seam allowance down before turning it inside out and sewing again, or you didn't really get to that seam to the edge before sewing your second seam. But yeah, let me know if you have any questions.